Okay, so this is another in the series of videos about what expats abroad will need to do if an elderly relative becomes sick in the UK. I've already covered on other videos the medical side of things, including paperwork. I very much hope that if you're in this case, your situation doesn't end the way this one has. But my father sadly passed away, so at this point there are now the things to do to close the estate. So if your mother or father left a will, then the will be a binding document that can be taken to their solicitors, ideally, for processing. In my case, there is no other next of kin, although there was no will. The legal proceedings become simpler when there are no other, children or relatives in that sense. So the first thing you're going to do is go to the hospital or facility where your loved one has passed away. You're going to be given a medical certificate from the doctor who signed off on the death of your loved one there. Now, in the case of London here, I then brought that certificate the next day to Ealing Town Hall. You will take it to your local town hall, wherever that might be, and I would imagine the proceedings are much the same. They will give you a certificate of insurance, which I will show you now.
Sorry, certificate of insurance. I don't know what I'm talking about. Death certificate. So this is what the death certificate looks like. It's a pale green piece of paper. Now, certainly the um,
The procedure at Ealing Town Hall, where I went, it's £11 per copy of each death certificate, but be careful to only order as many as you need. You'll need to take this certificate to each branch where your mother or father had a bank account, a building society, any sort of financial instrument. But they will be able to make photocopies of this original. So the only reason you would probably need more than one copy of the death certificate, and as I say, they're £11 each, would be if you need to mail it to a head office, perhaps for companies who do not have branches nearby or that you can visit. So you'll also then start laying out the paperwork, as I had to do in this case, and going through the affairs in question. So I've just sort of laid everything out on the floor here. So there's a number of different things going on here. So this column over here is property. So my father was a renter. So what I have there are the statements that I was able to find for his rent agreement, which he paid the rent monthly. I notified his housing association. I filled in a form there, and I'll be handing them the keys after all of our services, etc., are finished here in London. I also notified Thames Water, who provided his water, and British Gas, who provided both his gas and his electricity, and they have all effectively ended the account. So that takes care of the property side of things. I mean, obviously, if your parent owned property, then there will be different procedures. If they rented, I would imagine it would be, a much simpler scenario, as in this case. So then the next set of paperwork that we have there is life insurance and pensions. So my father had a couple of private pensions, and actually two of them were administered by the same company, Legal and General. So I notified Legal and General, and that effectively took care of the pension for both his, I think his bus driver, Centre West, which he'd been a bus driver for about 8 years, and before that he'd worked for Unigate Dairies and then Dairy Crest. That pension is administered by a different company, I believe called Mercer, and the other company handling legal and general pension was my mother's pension from when she died, in that he had received a fraction pension thereof after her death. So they were all notified. So that takes care of the pensions. The life insurance do not have a branch here in London, so they will require an original to be mailed to them, and I have a form that I downloaded. I spoke to someone from their bereavement department on the phone. They were very helpful, emailed me a form which I'm in the process of filling out, and I will need to send that to their head office along with one original death certificate. So those would be the cases where you do need to get more than one. That then takes care of the notifications for the financials on the pensions, etc. You then move across to banks and building societies, which
that would be these forms over here. Banks, building societies, other investment situations. So I've been into the branches of my father's. I've been into the branches of his building society and his bank. They each took copies of the death certificate, and his accounts are now effectively ended at those branches. They have my details and my address abroad, and they will be, after closing out the accounts, mailing checks to me for his remaining assets, and they will do that for you in whichever country you request that the monies go to. I did consider if it would be easier for me to just open accounts here with roughly the same institutions, for it to be easier to actually transfer the money, but the fact that I don't have an existing UK address means that they can't open accounts for me even if I wanted to. So we end up back with this scenario whereby they mail the checks to me. Now, if your parent had a brokerage account and other financial instruments, then you will of course need to contact those brokers, who also may or may not have a kind of high street presence that you can go into. You may also need to mail them copies of the certificate of death, and then that will run its course procedurally. So you tell the landlord effectively, that would be the bank obviously if there was a mortgage, it will be the council or the private landlord if it was a rental, gas, water, electric, and once you've taken care of the utilities, it's on to the financial institutions, banks, building societies, brokerage accounts, and just going through the process really of telling all of them what's going on. I found in the case of Thames Water actually that was really helpful. I couldn't find a statement for Thames Water. I did in the end, but at the time I couldn't find one. If you think your loved one had an account with someone, but you're not sure who, they can usually look everything up by address. So I had them look up if indeed Thames Water did provide the water for my father based on this address, and they confirmed that he did. And they're going to be very helpful for you understanding the bereavement and the circumstances. So if you're not sure, just call a couple of companies who you think it might be, and until you obviously strike the right one, and then they'll help you through on the process at their end. A lot of these big companies now have a bereavement team who will speak to you on the phone, and they understand the tone that they need to speak to you with. Obviously, sometimes those conversations will be very soon after the bereavement, so you yourself will be emotional and perhaps not thinking clearly, perhaps not taking notes. So always in those cases, give them an email address, ask them to follow up if they could after the phone call with an email, surmising the extent of the conversation that you just had. That's it for this part. Obviously, I'll do a second video to discuss possessions, and in this case, there's going to be a fair amount of charity donations. So I'll cover that in a future video.